I thought of contacting you when we first heard about the Harvard events and those kids, because there were people saying, nothing will happen to them. So can we say what happened to you and what can happen to them, possibly?
So what happened to me, I got fired almost 10 years ago from a tenured academic position in American Indian Studies for making comments, critical of Israel. And then I went on, to lose other jobs subsequently, and I ended up leaving academia altogether because I couldn't find any work in it. So for people who are speaking in support of Palestine, condemning the behavior or the actions of the Israeli government, yes, there very often is a price to pay. And that's true really in most of the Western states that I can think of.
The price for you was rather expensive, was a big price to pay. Because if I remember correctly, it was not only tenure, but there were some very good universities too.
Yes. The university I was originally fired from was the University of Illinois, which is a well-regarded university in the United States. And so it subsequently became a big story. And then I lost a job a few years later at the American University of Beirut, which was a big surprise, I think, to a lot of people. So it's a big problem because there are, even in these grand institutions, these very public spaces, the repression can get to you, and so it's something I think people should be mindful of.
We should remind to our listeners that it was the time of 2014 events. Again, right. We were having around 3,000 people dead in Palestine, if I'm not mistaken. And you dared on Twitter to write something pro-Palestinian. That was your crime. That you had to.
That was my crime. Yes. That and so yeah. In 2014, it was a horrible 51 days in which Israel was bombarding the Gaza Strip. So yeah, around 3,000 people died. They were murdered. Over 500 children. I think the final tally was like 551 children. Something, a horrible number, an incomprehensible number, which is dwarfed by what happening now, unfortunately. But yes, I was very vocal in my condemnation of Israel and my support for the Palestinian people, who were suffering this bombardment. And but also even before that, there's a context too that I had been very active in the BDS movement leading up to that point, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. So I think to some degree there was already a target on my back. And once they saw tweets that they considered adequately provocative, they saw an opportunity to go ahead and get me in trouble.
The movement in the United States seems stronger and stronger, though. I think that today we're seeing things that in 2014 we didn't. Isn't it true?
Yes.
How did this happen? How did the Palestinian cause become more near to the hearts of people in the United States?
It's been the result of a lot of work, a lot of unseen and unacknowledged labor by people who have been working in the shadows, working behind the scenes, working diligently, and often as the subject of our conversation today, at great personal cost to themselves. A lot of people have been fired or faced some other type of hardship. People have been dragged into court. So the repression has been systematic. It's been brutal at times, but people just kept going. They kept speaking up. They organized around the BDS movement. They just kept going because they knew that the story they had to tell was not only critical, to the well-being of the world, but compelling. And it was an ethical story, a moral story. And so people stuck with it. They began to compel more and more people to understand that the Palestinian is not the aggressor, but the Palestinian is the oppressed. And so it sort of took on a momentum of its own, and the consciousness is certainly being raised. But I think the problem in the United States, as in with a lot of European governments, is that the will of the people and the understanding of the people is not matched by the actions of their governments.
We have also to remind to our listeners that you're an American citizen. You were born in the United States. You're not someone who went there, because sometimes they say the Arabs came here, or, the Americans say that, or there are foreigners who came here and changed that. You were born in the United States. You're born, raised in an American citizen. That's important, I think.
Yes.
I read one of your last articles. I will give your blog address in our interview, but I would like about why this kind of resistance, explaining the violence. And you had some memories of when you were a kid and you were sent to one of the camps. Can you please remind us that?
I will do my best. Absolutely. This actually was when I was in college. I spent some time in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, and at different points in my life, I've been to the Arab world, to Palestine and to Jordan, etc. So I had some familiarity with it. But in the camp, I began to notice that people reacted almost viscerally to acts of resistance that were being reported on the news. And I came to understand, much better than I had before, that for them, it wasn't a question of politics. It was an existential question. It was a question of being able to return home. They were living in very difficult conditions in a refugee camp without citizenship to any state, and really at the mercy constantly of outside forces. And so they wanted to go home. And I realized that people who are subject to that kind of treatment, people who are stateless, people who exist in exile and poverty, don't have the luxury of the type of moralizing that a lot of people in the intellectual class like to do. That for them, it's a practical matter, that if the resistance helps them to get home, then they will support the resistance. And we see this with the people in Gaza right now, that, they're pent up. They've been under siege for, however, over 10 years now, 16 years now, I believe. They're going hungry. They're not allowed to travel. And so the act of resistance, the act of fighting back, gives them it gives them a feeling of hope, sometimes even of jubilation, that their suffering somehow might end, and they might be able to go home, and they might be able to be treated finally humanely and be taken seriously as human beings, which is impossible for them living under the Zionist military occupation.
And also the West, who's supposed to be so humane and civilized, doesn't show any civilized or humane face to them. I mean, I don't understand how we can do that today, how our governments can do that today, but they know, right? They know that they have the peoples on their side, and they do not have the strong governments, the G7 people on their side. So yes. I remember the quiet and peaceful and non-violent protests in Gaza back in 2018, 2019.
That's right.
What was the answer of the Israelis then?
Exactly. They shot them down, and killed them by the hundred. It's true, but that's the thing about the the colonial discourse that the Israelis and their their allies and sponsors, they always say that no type of Palestinian action will satisfy them, whether it's nonviolent or violent, other than their voluntary disappearance. They're supposed to sit down, shut up, accept their role in history, which is to disappear to the benefit of their occupier and colonizer. And anything beyond that, above and beyond that, is going to be met with moral condemnation, whether it's violent or not. I mean, we've seen that for 7 decades now.
You reminded me of an interview I did back in 2014, I think, with Russell Means, the leader of the Indian movement in the United States from the Lakota people. He have told me that the Palestinians are what we would all have to be. If we wanted to continue exist, we had to be like them. We were mistaken. We thought we could talk with these people. So there's something there. Now, today, as things are, of course, we're on the streets everywhere in the world. November 4th is a day that we will be everywhere, millions and millions of us, maybe billions of us. But what else can we do? And how can we tell to people like you, and if you have that experience, please tell us about that, because we need that, that we're here, that you lost a lot, but you gained something, the respect and the love and the admiration of so many people.
Well, that really comes from having always the people of Palestine in my heart, and I'm always first and foremost trying to do right by them and trying to support them and trying to act in a way that validates and dignifies their struggle. And that would kind of be I think my answer, because honestly, I find what's happening almost inconceivable. It's comprehensible, it's understandable at an intellectual level, but morally, I'm finding it inconceivable, overwhelmingly inconceivable. I think a lot of people are feeling the same kind of horror and helplessness, both outside and inside of Palestine, of course. But people just need to keep doing what they're doing. They can't let the slander and the defamation that comes from sectors of the ruling class and the government to deter them. And they can't, and this is very important. This is really more of a philosophical thing than a practical thing, but I still think it's important. They should not try to appease the consciousness of the oppressor, of the occupier. It's not going to work. Then you end up really invalidating the struggle of the oppressed, the struggle of the colonized. You have to hold firm in a certain set of principles in the face of hostility. And the primary principle is that the Palestinian people are struggling for freedom, and they are allowed to struggle with whatever means they have, at whatever limited means they have at their disposal. And so I would suggest for people who are outside of Palestine, that it's not especially useful to go into these modes of moralizing or tactical analysis. The Palestinians know how they want to resist. They understand their tactical situation. What they need are for people to defend them, to defend their humanity, to defend their lives, to defend their right to freedom, as any other human being has that right. And they're not a repository for people to career build or raw material for people's self-gratification. That they are a body of human beings, our sisters and brothers in this world, and what they need from us is a full-throated, unapologetic defense, because the entire political class, the entire ruling class in the Arab world, outside the Arab world, is against them. You have the presidents of the most powerful countries in the world condemning them, calling them terrorists. You have the Israeli government, referring to them as animals and mowing them down. They don't need us, to pile onto that purposefully or inadvertently. What they need are friends and allies and supporters. And we should do that unapologetically to the best of our ability.